10:30. So welcome everybody. Lovely to see you here at our Zoom on governance and leadership. We've done quite a few of these in the last few weeks, actually. We've sort of gone from doing nothing to kind of quite a lot. So it's quite exciting. We're learning all the time, but it's still kind of slightly experimental. So bear with us. Obviously, there's quite a lot of you here today. So unfortunately, I won't be able to ask you all to introduce yourselves. But I will just kind of introduce who we are. I'm Charlotte Jones. I'm Chief Executive of ITC. I shall be chairing the session today. And with me, I have my colleague Zoe, our General Manager, who will be kind of managing the technical side of this Zoom, and Thea, who is our Communications Manager. And Thea is going to kind of keep her eye on the chat. And there's a couple of little domestics that I wanted to introduce you to. So first of all, obviously you'll all be muted until you are asked to ask your question. And if you have questions or comments or things you want to throw into the conversation, if you could put those into the chat area. And in order to make it easier for us to see that you're actually raising a question, if you could entitle your question, so put that in caps before it, then Thea will be able to see it, and hopefully we'll be able to get through quite a few of your questions as we go through. We're due to finish at 11:45, so we've got an hour and a quarter. We've got 3 speakers for you this morning. We have Ali King, who is Chair of ITC and Chief Executive of Turtle Key Arts. We have Emma Rees, who is currently Interim Chief Exec of Theatre Centre and was a few years ago our co-chair at ITC. And we also have Kate Organ from the West Midlands, freelancer who's worked for many years for the Arts Council and for many of our companies, and does regular board work, board strategy work and board retreats. So very, very pleased to have the 3 of you with us. Thank you so much. Oh my goodness, I've been brought a cup of tea. Thank you very much, Zabby. Right. That was my son. So what the format for this morning then is that we'll hear from our speakers first, and then we'll open it up to questions, and hopefully we'll have a bit of a debate. This is the kind of extension actually of a smaller grouping that we had a few weeks ago on boards and leadership, where we do a kind of 2 types of Zoom activity at the moment. We do some small members forums where people actually have the opportunity to talk to each other. And then these are the slightly larger ones where we've kind of drawn some of the things that came out of that one and are sharing them with a wider audience. One of the things that's come out of various discussions over the last few weeks actually has been a request for us to run a chairs forum, which we're very, very keen and happy to do. So if any of you either are a chair or have a chair of your organisation that you think could benefit from peer support within a membership forum, give us a shout and we will set that up over the next couple of weeks. Is there anything else I need to say on the domestic, Zoe? Is there anything I've forgotten? Okay, brilliant. So we will start then, and I'm going to start by asking our chair, Ali King, to give her reflections on boards and governance and how we need to behave at this strange time. Ali.
Yes. Hello everyone, lovely to see you all today, and I hope that we can be useful and answer all your questions. So just to explain, as Charlotte has said, I am the chair of the Independent Theatre Council. I believe this is my 4th or third year as chair, 4th year as chair. Also I run Turtle Key Arts. We're an arts organisation. Our office base is in the Lyric Hammersmith. We do production work that tours nationally and internationally, and we also do a whole string of bespoke outreach projects in partnership with other organisations. So obviously, as this all happened, I think at the time of lockdown actually happening, we had 13 projects that got pulled, either outreach projects or tours that were happening, work in development or even in rehearsal. So I'm sure, like many of you, I sort of spent the first 3 weeks as a CEO kind of unravelling everything, supporting our network of artists and companies that we support, and working out what on earth we could do. And then very importantly, working out whether we could survive this lockdown. And that obviously continued So, and we actually had a board meeting at Turtle Key Arts just before the lockdown happened. It was kind of mid-March. And so we sort of were looking at the Arts Council's new strategy that had been launched. We were having all these sort of grand plans as to how we might fit into that 10-year plan, and having quite a sort of, you know, forward-thinking, idyllic meeting in a way. And then obviously, you know, this kind of changed everything quite dramatically. And from a CEO's point of view, my board were very supportive. They all sort of got in touch and reached out. But what was really good is they didn't load extra pressure on, because it's still changing now. I mean, every day it's still changing and there's new news. But what we did very instantly at Turtle Key, once we'd sort of unravelled and cancelled everything, was to do a kind of, we'd had obviously our budget for 2021 to be approved by the board, but very quickly we did a stripped back sort of lockdown COVID budget, which we're still updating sort of every week or so. Myself and my finance manager revisit this budget and have a look at it and see what else we can save. And I got that and other information out to the board, and then a couple of phone calls that was needed. And then kind of after about a month or so into lockdown, I sent them a bigger update, because we worked out then what projects we could meaningfully move online, what we could start up, what we could continue. We were fortunate enough to get some ACE emergency funding, so the impact of that. So my board were definitely there for me, but I would say in a positive way, light touch, which I felt was really important, because they didn't suddenly want loads of extra information from me or demanding different things. They sort of let us work it out, myself and the team, and you know, and find out how we were going to work. One of my board particularly works in sort of HR and management, so he was incredibly useful when we came to furlough staff, and was very supportive. So we went to individual board members, and we're about to have our first proper board meeting in a couple of weeks. But in the meantime, I've sort of kept them updated and sent things, and I found that personally as a CEO to be really useful, and exactly the sort of level of support I needed. So I felt very cradled rather than pressurised, because I know sometimes boards can ask a lot, and I think in this situation it's been really important that your board kind of almost nurture you. So then obviously on the other side of the coin, as it was all happening, I was very aware that I am chair of the Independent Theatre Council, and obviously very worried about the sector that I care about so much. So Charlotte and I have been in touch the whole way through. As I sort of said, I've actually just written a blog, but sometimes it was just to kind of rant about what on earth was being said by the government or what we could be doing, but also other times to support, and for Charlotte to have a sounding board. So I hoped and felt that I could be that. And again, I didn't put any pressure on them. We, you know, ITC were really working so hard to support you all, to work out what they could do online and to get set up. And as a chair, it was more to listen and to help and support, I felt, and to enable. So we did, myself and the two vice chairs got together with Charlotte, and you know, the ITC team had done some financial planning themselves, some forecasting, which we felt was really important, just to again know where we stood. And then what I did was I got in touch with the rest of the board, because ITC is quite a large board, there's about 15 on the board at any one time, and to let them know that we were in touch and that Charlotte and I were talking, and that, you know, and that I was in touch with the vice chairs and we were having a smaller meeting. And then recently we did have a sort of board Zoom, and it was really helpful, and Charlotte sent 3 papers and an update, and it was really good for the rest of the team. And we have a board WhatsApp group that's been buzzing with sort of useful tips or things that might be useful to read, and it sort of worked that way. So I sort of took that sort of caring and nurturing way, and I felt that was the best way to support ITC, to know that I could be called at any time of day or night. And obviously we're very keen to know that they would be okay, and also to check in with Charlotte as a wonderful conduit to find out how the rest of the sector, and whether, I think all of our experiences from everything I've heard and read and spoken to all seem very similar. So I was really keen to know that. But I really felt as a chair that it was important to know that, for them to know that you were there, to be supportive but not to pressurise, because it has just been such an evolving thing, and I hope that we've got the balance right. And it's also quite hard, I think, probably for any of your boards, when it is such a sort of voluntary position, to in your own sort of chaos, remember to have the time. And I did sort of in sort of halfway through week 1 or 2, think, oh my goodness me, I've got to check in with the ITC as well and make sure they're okay. So yeah, I mean, for me, I wanted a board that supported me and without putting pressure, and then the same to apply that to ITC, because, and also to have trust. You know, as a chair, it's like, I trust ITC. You know, they're an amazing team. They're all incredibly competent and very skilled at the jobs they do. So I felt as a chair, it was to know that, to have that breath, and to know that you can trust them, and therefore we can truly be a board and actually, you know, maybe underpin things or support. And we did it in other ways by getting the board energised to really support ITC, you know, online, getting information out there as well. But I think that trust was important. And I also think, I think Charlotte and I are very aligned with this. I felt both as a chair and a chief executive would be, I mean, I haven't stopped working since this all kicked off, but to also have that moment of pausing and knowing that, you know, to have the time to reflect and plan, and actually lockdown has done that for us as an organisation. We haven't reacted so quickly. We've sort of taken time and then reacted as feels appropriate to us, and hopefully that's been useful. So that's my experience from both sides, and hopefully I've practiced what I've preached is my plan. And I hope, you know, and I know it is very hard as a board member, because, you know, you do sometimes want to get in and get dirty, but the important thing is to really just be, you know, to stand back, but for them to know that you are absolutely on the end of a telephone, or in this instance a screen, and that there should never be a moment of I can't pick up the phone. I think that's probably a good amount for now, and I'm happy to answer any questions anyone might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ali. And yes, I can certainly testify that the support of our board has been really brilliant through all of this. There is a lot to the role of the board in times like this, and I think that combination of holding us to account and supporting is a difficult balance to manage. But I think it's really important to have boards engaged all the way through at the moment. So Emma, we'd be really interested to hear your reflections.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Charlotte, I've interrupted you.
No,
thanks, Ali. That was really, really great. And it's sort of, what I'm going to say is just going to amplify an awful lot of what Ali has already said. When I was sort of sitting down thinking, what should I say? I'm really aware there's going to be an awful lot of teaching people to suck eggs. So I just thought it might be useful to approach from a point of view of just remembering some of the things that really float to the surface, particularly at a time like this. So just for background, I'm currently, as Charlotte said, Exec Director, Chief Exec at Theatre Centre. I'm on the board of Theatre 503 and also of a Chronic Fatigue Syndrome Society that's based in Sussex. I have previously been on a number of boards, including co-chair of ITC, Stage Management Association, various theatre companies, Just Jones, Redshift, etc. And a few of the things, I was an SRM at Arts Council and the London Theatre team for some time, and so I saw an awful lot of other boards in action. So there's just some things that really sort of float up. Some of them are legal and some of them are much more sort of, you know, person-driven, person-based. But one of the things which I thought was quite interesting just to flag is that most of our companies will have a board who are trustees of the charity, but also directors of a company limited by guarantee or an equivalent. The two sets of responsibilities are clearly very complementary, but they are different. And if you are an organisation that only has a charity and doesn't have the board, it will function in a slightly different way, but it just sort of it's important to remember the legal responsibilities that those people have and the exposure that they have, the personal exposure, particularly at a time like this, when there is an awful lot at stake and there's an awful lot that's changing very, very rapidly. The most important thing, you know, a board is a group of people. The staff are a group of people, and it's all about the dynamic and the relationships and the communication between those two sets of people. The people, you know, the board members in this call will be absolutely aware of why they prioritised spending their time supporting the organisation that they support, and the people who are reporting into a board in this call will be aware of the kind of support and and contribution that they need. The communication is really, really key to establish that shared understanding. If you're trying to establish that shared understanding right now, then something wasn't working brilliantly well previously. So I don't know how organisations approach inducting boards, but from my own experience and from my own observations, if there is a proper process that's not heavy, but as inclusive and as formal as the process that you would have around inducting a member of staff, you're far more likely to get to the point where your board understands why they're there and is able to support the staff as well as possible. And asking challenging questions is a responsibility of the board, but if it feels like it's an antagonistic process, then there's something about that dynamic that isn't working as well as it could. So when people join a board, they want to make a contribution. They really, really do. They want to add value, and it's creating the space for that value to be added in the most beneficial way that's important. The asking the right questions is absolutely categorically key. One thing that I noticed when I was on the board of ITC is that everybody, all board members of the ITC, are used to reporting to a board themselves. And that makes a really interesting dynamic. I think that's the only board I've ever seen where that is the case. But it means that the quality of the questions and the quality of the information and the flow between the two is really, really important and really key. People understand, have a natural understanding of where asking this question might be great because it shows that you're really on top of the detail, but it isn't necessarily a supportive and helpful question to ask. That the bigger question is the one that we're after. It's very easy to get lost in the detail if you are providing an awful lot of detail to your board, but if it's the big questions that you want to address, then keep it to keep it in that space. Provide board briefings, provide all the documents, etc., so that people can have read that, got to grips with that, and answered their own questions before they come into the meeting. One of the things that I'm really interested in when I'm sitting in board meetings, either as a board member, as an observer, or reporting in, is the closed question and the open question. And I've noticed so many times that if you start a conversation with your board or as a board member with the closed question, it usually means that you haven't actually had the open questions that might get you to the point where you could answer that really easily. So an example of that might be if you're looking at ethical considerations, if you're asking a very closed question of the board, or if the board is asking a very close question of you, then that means that there's an awful lot of work that needs to be done before you can be in a point really simply on that question. I hope that makes sense, but it is really, really very clear when it's functioning. Your board is a place where open questions are most useful and most supportive. One of the things at a time of real crisis like this, and Ali just it outlined the process that her organisation has been through and the ITC has been through, it really throws your board composition into stark relief. Skills audits are brilliant, skills audits are really, really necessary, but it's times like this when you see where those skills are best being used. And one of the really key things is, and ITC has clearly got this nailed brilliantly, if you don't have a member of your board who is checking in on how the staff team is, then your board composition isn't right. It's so important that that supportive feeling comes from your board, and that it doesn't feel like you're taking your homework to be marked. Again, I know that's such an obvious thing, but it's really it's key, and it all goes back to the process of induction. It all goes back to the process of establishing that shared understanding of why that group of people are around the table and why that group of people really care about the work that you're doing. I just want to flag, and again, I don't need to unpack this with anybody, but representation and inclusion at board level is absolutely crucial. If you don't have it at your board level, then all of the rest is window dressing, because it's not the work that you're doing won't be coming from within the DNA of the organisation. The DNA of an organisation, no matter how short or long-lived it has been, sits with the board and the staff team and the body of work that it's created. And if that is not representative and inclusive, then your organisation might be doing great work, but it's only ever project to project to project, or piece of work to piece of work to piece of work. If it's not embedded in your organisation, then it will become clear and it will become obvious, particularly in the kind of climate that we're in at the moment, with the huge challenges that we're facing across the globe. So I think that's probably about everything. There's just a few other things around board composition just to think about. How can you invite people to make their contribution in the way that's most useful for them and for you, whether that's board or staff, and how might you be able to balance or rebalance things within your organisation through your board composition. It's no bad thing to be recruiting board members right now because you've realised that you've got a gap in your board because you're in a time of crisis. Don't just plough on and think we'll do it when we get to it. Start the process now and make it an inclusive, open recruitment as you would with a staff member, so that you're not just picking through an address list. But again, I know that everybody's fully aware of this. But there's just things around balance. So an example is, I'm aware of an organisation that has 2 male ADs, and they have an absolute mandated obligation within their organisation. While that is the case, they will always have a female chair. So it's sort of, how can you put those mechanisms in place to make sure that your organisation doesn't start to quietly slip down into a sort of a more siloed approach? How can you build in the ability to be really, really sort of open? And I think I'm going to conclude just by saying, from my own point of view, reporting to the Theatre Centre Board, and from my point of view right now, of being a very new board member at 503, just the support, the nurturing, and the not putting pressure on that Ali really flagged is so important. So nailing the questions, nailing when they need to be asked, and that's a two-way street. Don't overwhelm your board, but ask them when you really, really need their skills, and when you really need them to make your response even better, because that's what the board conversation should be about: improving on the work you're doing, not just checking in and making sure that everybody thinks that, yep, that's okay, rubber stamp it and off you go. It should feel at the end of every board meeting like you leave thinking that the work has improved, or the mechanisms you have for delivering them have improved. I hope that was useful, but I'm so aware that I'm talking to a whole bunch of people who know pretty much all of those things I've just explored, but I hope it was useful just to gather it together.
Thank you very much, Emma. Yes, I think some really interesting points in there. Kate, can I move over to you? And if you'd just like to say who you are, a little bit of an introduction, and then give us your reflections.
Well, hi everybody, it's really lovely to be here. Yeah, okay, so my name's Kate, and I've had decades of, embarrassingly number of decades of experience with boards, from, I don't know, being a board member on a community arts project in, gotta be 45 years ago. And yeah, so I've kind of gained this experience by being somebody who's had to report to a board as an executive director of a company. Somebody like Emma, who's observed many boards of very many sizes as an arts funding body person. I do some training. I'm currently chair of one trust, and yeah, I've reported, I've observed, I've been a board member, I've chaired boards, so that's my credentials. I'm a governance geek, I'm sorry. Listening to Emma, it's uncanny, because I thought, oh God, I'm going third. Will there be anything left to say? And there isn't really, because it's as if Emma and I sat down beforehand and said, these are the key issues, because I kind of go, oh yeah, she said that now, okay, so I don't have to say that. But I'll probably just repeat it from a slightly different stance, okay? So I also took a few soundings just the last couple of days with, a few people who are chief execs really are having to report to boards. I haven't spoken to a chair of a board, but I have spoken to chief execs, and then I began to realize this is quite a difficult task, to be generic about boards, particularly to a membership like ITC, which by its very nature is experimental, innovative, diverse, has diverse structures, has diverse ways of doing things, and diverse things it does. And I thought, is there anything that they have in common. Well, it was interesting talking to some actual people, because it sort of galvanized one of my theories, which was that in times of terrible trouble, and the trouble I'm thinking about is times of great family catastrophe, grief, loss, catastrophe, it's always seemed to me that where relationships are good, they improve, and where relationships are bad, they deteriorate. And I thought that's probably true of boards. If you've got a good functioning board, they'll step up and be, I mean, everybody will go a bit panicky at the beginning. Obviously, this is a terrible, terrible disaster. But the good ones will know how to behave, and the bad ones will kind of carry on in a panic, I guess. I'm not quite sure. But my very small sample had some interesting contradictory advice, which seemed to me entirely reflecting the kinds of relationships they have with their boards. So one said, get rid of the chair and form a functioning small group that you could actually feel supported by. I thought, oh, I know that board. Yes, I won't mention any names, obviously, but yeah, I would do that in your position. Another one said, feed the animals. I thought, oh my God, what a terrible view you have of your board. But the other one said, stop giving them any reports and have functioning conversations. I mean, these are very kind of bland things to say, but it just reminded me of that issue of if your board isn't right now is a good time to start thinking about what it should be doing. I know you've got huge numbers of pressures, but this is the time to change the normal. So what I want to say about this is just two strands of thinking. One is, what kind of board do you have, and does that model need to adapt? And the second thing I'm going to talk about is, which decision need the board's agreement, and how do you harness their role in decision making? Because I also think there'll be a lot of unwarranted bits of advice early on. And that often happens on boards anyway. My favorite moment ever was in a renowned arts centre that I was a board member of, where the chair would frequently make suggestions like, I really think it would be great if we introduced a South Korean cinema strand at this point, at the point where the cinema was losing loads of money. And I remember learning the art of dealing with that sort of thing, which was, that's a very interesting point. I'm going to take a look at that, what the chief executive said. And the subject never arose again. But you don't want those kinds of unwarranted bits of advice and tips, and have you thought of doing this? Because of course you've thought of doing this. You've thought of absolutely every possible conceivable option way ahead of your board. So how do we, what sort of board have you got, and which decisions need that board's agreement, and how do you get them there? Like Emma, I have to sometimes go back to those really fundamental legal, formal responsibilities. And if nothing else is working, and if no other nuanced sort of support or possibilities for the board to support the company, I'm talking about worst case scenario here, but the very bottom line is that the board's public legal responsibilities are to have the right person in charge, that they delegate their executive role to. That's their fundamental job. And the second and third are to remain solvent and be safe. Those are their legal responsibilities. Those are the risks they take as individuals agreeing to be either a charitable trustee or a director, a non-exec director. So quite often boards are never really asked to make a decision. Again, I will mention a name because he has been a magnificent accountant to numerous ITC members in the West Midlands, and some of you who are in the West Midlands will know the accountant Barry Matthews. And I've sat on more boards with Barry as the accountant than I care to remember. But he said to me once that he thought boards were really a bit like the Greek chorus. So they arrive at a meeting and somebody gives them some information. If it's good, they wail. And if it's sorry, if it's good, they cheer the champion that achieved it, and if it's bad, they go, woe is me, woe is me. They don't actually do anything. But I'm not as cynical as that. I think there are really good ways in which you can guide the people you've chosen to be on your board to make good the decisions that they are responsible for making ultimately. So there are various ways of describing what the models of a board are when you're looking at is your board the right one. And I could send around a little thing later which outlines those. I found it quite useful for boards to have a look at themselves and go, are we the advisory model? Are we the patron model? Are we the cooperative model? Cooperative model usually means no chair and you only have a board because the law demands it. Can be more functional than that. Are you the management team model, which follows this? Usually larger organizations and building-based organizations have that model, which sort of follows the structure of their own, complex departments. Or are you the policy model, which really distinguishes between the operational and executive job of the company, that is the job the staff do, and the strategic governance issues, which is the business of the board. And that reflects back to what Emma was saying about the right kind of questions and the level of questions, not the shall we have a South Korean cinema strand at this moment, but what are we attempting to do by having a cinema? I think it's those levels of that you would really want a board to be involved in. And then there's the other one, which some ITC members may have, which is the sort of active volunteers model, where actually there may hardly be anybody who's paid to do any work at all, but the board are the volunteers that make the charity or the organisation function. They do everything. They do the front of house. They do the ticket sales. They do everything. So deciding which one you are, and you're probably a combination of the advisory, the patron, and maybe the policy one, I would hope. If you're a combination of those, even then it's useful to know which one are you being when you're being it. In these particular times, there may be different people who are fulfilling different parts of those different model functions, and that's all right. Have the ones doing the things that they are most useful at doing. Somebody mentioned skills, and I think there's been a very long tradition of a skills audit, and those skills are usually the usual ones are legal, generic, legal or HR or marketing or whatever. I think increasingly the skills is not so much important as those may very well be within the staff, but knowledge and networks is the one that's very useful for organizations such as yours. That is also worth, it's worth examining how you can learn from those wider networks that your boards bring to your organization, especially at this time. Oh, I've lost my way now. In terms of how you how you get a board to make decisions, we've already heard that sometimes it's a small group, a sounding board, might be your one-to-one relationship with your chair, and occasionally it'll be larger, full-scale, more the more usual board meeting style. I think boards' behaviour usually emerges through some sort of custom and practice, and I think these are also useful times in which to introduce a new procedure. Now, procedure makes it sound really formal. I don't really mean it as a formality. I mean it as a process. And I was talking to the board, the chair of a board, a small company the other day, and we talked through how you get to decisions when somebody turns up at the meeting, they've already decided what they think we should be deciding. Somebody else is still in the in the stream of just reacting emotionally to the whole thing. Somebody else has 4 different options, and somebody else doesn't have enough information upon which to make a decision. And so I guided this particular chair through the idea that you do those in order, and you get everybody to do each section in order. So you start with the objective knowledge. Now that might be a paper in advance, or it might simply be an update, but it's not an update followed by the Greek chorus either wailing or cheering. It's an update in order that we are now all of us on the same page just to go to the next stage. And the next stage is, how do we feel about this? What are we worried about? What do we think might be the implications of this? But hold them back from making a decision. Hold back decisions, hold back options, hold back suggestions. Just lay it all out there. The third stage is looking at options. And this means that everybody is then involved in options. I mean, it's, you know, it's not exactly a brainstorm, but let's look at all the options. Decide whether more information is needed to flesh out those options, but don't go into 15 scenario plans. You'll go mad. Just keep looking at those options. And the fourth stage is decisions. And you don't have to make those decisions there and then in that meeting. But you're holding people into each section of that one by one in turn, and don't allow the decision makers to come in at the same point as somebody else is having an emotional reaction. Allow the emotional reactions first. So it's a definite order of play in making decisions. And when I was talking this through with this chair, she said, oh yeah, that's how Boal does it. I'm guessing many of you will be familiar with Augusto Boal, the Theatre of the Oppressed man. And I'd forgotten, because it's a long time since I was a creative practitioner, that yes, yes, of course, that's how he does it. He asks the audience, what do we see here? What can we hear here? Then he asks, how do we feel about it? Then he asks them to say what might happen, what could happen. Let's act out what might happen. And finally, he says, what will we do then? And I think that's a really great structure to maintain an equality of participation by board members. I think that's probably it. I'm just saying that those are the two things that are not, it's not a daft time to ask, what type of board have you got? Does it know what kind of a board it is? Does it need to change radically, or just a bit, or just some rearrangements? And my second point is really hone what decisions do they really need to make, and how will you and your chair, if you have one, help them to make them in a structured way.
Thank you very much, Kate. That's brilliant, actually. That 4-stage process and linking it to Augusto Boal, I think is a real revelation for me, actually. It also sounds a little bit like the, yeah, amazing. Also sounds a little bit like the coaching grow model. And I realise that that's what one does require from one's board is that kind of slightly coaching relationship where they help you to kind of reach solutions rather than either imposing them through advice or you know, going too much into detail on scrutiny. Those were 3 really, really helpful and illuminating presentations. Thank you very much. A few of the things that they flagged up to me, I'm hoping very much that you've been putting your questions into the chat zone. So, but just while you do, or if you're thinking about those, there's a couple of things I'd like to draw out of what I've heard, I think. One of the things that I'm always conscious of with boards is that I kind of characterize them as the custodians of the values for the organization, and I think that's a very important role for boards to realize that they are. They're not there to manage the organization, they're not there to direct it, they're there to kind of hold the values and hold the purpose, and they're holding it there on behalf of our community, our public, because when you're a charity, and most of you I think will be if you have a board, that board is there to hold the company for the public benefit, and that's a really, really important part of what a board is there for. Often when I'm talking to our organisations and to other colleagues as well, the colleagues chief execs, some people will say, oh God, you know, I could manage the company so much easier without my board. And you sort of think, yes, I'm sure you could, but that's not what we're set up to do. When we're charities, we are set up to be held on trust for the public benefit. And it is only with having a board that we can exercise that role. And so that the accountability of the board is very important, their ability to hold us to our purpose. And at this particular time, I mean, we've been hugely challenged by the coronavirus and everything that it's meant for theatre. But a lot of the organisations I've been talking to over the last few weeks have been finding strength in adhering to their core values and their core purpose and building on that purpose. And I think that's one of the most crucial roles that your board can play at this time, is helping you to sort of locate yourself and your values and your purpose. So yeah, that's really made that a strong thought for me, actually, and thank you very much for that. So Theo,